At 29, June Halloway signed her name under her father's on the contract that sold his furniture company, and she has been living inside that signature ever since. 12 years later, the billionaire who bought it offers to hand the dying factory back to her, publicly generously for $1, because a woman with the founder's name has become inconvenient. She takes it knowing exactly what he expects to happen. What he does not know is what her father left unfinished in the back of that building. There are two ways to remove a person from your life. You can cut them and spend the next 10 years explaining the scar, or you can hand them something so heavy that they break under it in public, on their own 2 feet while you send flowers. Adrian Kessler had never once had to explain a scar. June Halloway was 41, drove a van with her own name stenciled crooked on the door, and had made exactly one mistake she could not stop rewriting. 12 years ago, she had put her signature under her father's on a contract that sold the family furniture company to a man who had never touched a board on purpose in his life. She spent those 12 years fixing other people's kitchens and taking the long way around Route 9 so she wouldn't have to look at the sign. Then Kessler brought her into a room with a view of 3 counties and told her he wanted to give it all back. He was smiling when he said it. That was the part she kept later, not the number, not the paperwork, not the pen. The smile of a man handing you a rope and calling it a gift. She took it anyway. The Merritt's kitchen had been built by somebody in a hurry, and June could hear it. She crouched in front of the run of base cabinets, with her palm flat against the face frame, and knocked twice with one knuckle, listening the way a doctor listens through a stethoscope, not for the sound, but for the wrongness inside the sound. The third cabinet answered dull and short. Somebody had leveled it with a folded cereal box. "It's the floor," Doug Merritt said from the doorway. He had said it 4 times since she arrived. It was the tone men used when they wanted a problem to belong to nobody. "House is 90 years old. Whole place leans." "The floor leans," June agreed. She worked the cardboard out with 2 fingers and held it up over her shoulder without turning around. "This is not the floor." Behind her, Doug's wife made a small, strangled noise that was almost a laugh. June set the cereal box on the counter, took her shims out of her back pocket, and got to work. She was 41 years old, and she had learned somewhere around 34 that she did not have to win the argument. The wood always testified eventually. All she had to do was stop talking long enough to let it. Her business fit inside a 15-year-old cargo van with Halloway woodwork, repair, restoration. Cabinetry stenciled on the side by a friend who had been slightly off-level herself the day she did it. June had never fixed the lettering. There was something honest about a woodworker's van with crooked letters. It told people up front that she cared more about what was inside the cabinet than what was printed on the door. She had one part-time helper, a 19-year-old named Kit, who came Tuesdays and Thursdays and was better at sanding than at showing up. She had $18,400 in savings, a rented house with a detached garage she had insulated herself, and a reputation in 3 counties that got her more work than she could take and less money than the work was worth. She could have priced higher. She knew that. She charged what the job cost plus what felt like a fair day, and every time she tried to write a bigger number, the pen slowed down on its own, and she had stopped fighting that too. She finished at 4. Doug Merritt shook her hand at the door with the specific enthusiasm of a man who intended to tell his neighbors he had found the problem himself, and June let him have it, because she had been paid, and because she was tired. The fast way home was Route 9. She took Route 9. She did not do it often. Maybe 3 times a year and never on purpose. She would come out of a job on the north side with the light going gold and her arms aching pleasantly, and she would simply forget to turn, and then the road would open up past the feed store and the long fence would start, and by then it was easier to keep driving than to admit to herself what she was doing. 14 acres, 2 brick buildings, and a metal one they had added in 1998. The kiln stacks. The gravel lot where she had learned to drive a forklift at 15 with her father, standing on the tine like an idiot, yelling instructions and laughing. The sign at the gate read, "Halloway Furniture," and underneath, in letters that were newer and cleaner and somehow more permanent, a Kessler Industrial Company. It had said Halloway and Daughters once. That was the part that still got her, 12 years on. Not the ampersand, the plural. Her father had made the sign in 1991 when she was 6 years old, and her sister Elaine was 9, and neither of them had shown the slightest interest in the business, and he had painted daughters on it anyway, because he was a stubborn romantic who believed a name was a promise you made in advance. Elaine had become an anesthesiologist in Portland and sent flowers to the funeral. June had stayed, and June had signed. She was 29 that year. Her father was 64 and had been carrying the company on a line of credit and a personality for 2 years, without telling anyone. And when it finally came apart, it came apart in 11 days. She had sat in the lawyer's office and read the offer, and done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic said take it. It still said take it. She had checked that math more times than a sane person checks anything, at 2 in the morning in the shower, in the middle of somebody else's kitchen, and it came out the same every time. The deal saved the jobs, cleared the debt, kept her father's house. It was the correct decision. She had made the correct decision at 29, and her father had lived 3 more years watching his name go on particle board, and correct had not turned out to be the same thing as forgivable. She passed the gate at 45 miles an hour and did not slow down, which she counted as growth. The rain caught her at the hardware store on Lyle Street, and so did Roy Dunham, coming out with a 5-gallon bucket in each hand like a man who had never once in his life made 2 trips. He was 63 now. 34 years on the Halloway floor, the last 12 of them under people who called him a cell lead. Junie. He set the buckets down to shake her hand, which was pure Roy. You did not shake a hand while holding something. You look like your father in the rain. That's the worst compliment I've ever gotten. It wasn't one. He grinned, then didn't. He shifted his weight. Saw what you said in the ledger. June had been waiting 3 weeks for somebody to say that to her face. The reporter had called about a piece on the county's furniture economy, 30 minutes on the phone, and June had talked to her the way you talk to somebody who is not going to print it, which was a stupid thing to do at 41. She had said that a company could be killed slowly by people who never once did anything you could point at. She had said that when you replace hardwood with fiberboard and call it a cost improvement, you're not improving a cost. You are borrowing against your own name. She had said Kessler Industrial had spent 12 years selling her father's reputation off a little at a time, in installments too small for anyone to notice, and that eventually the account would come up empty and the people in Dunbar would be the ones holding it. It had run under the headline Founder's Daughter. They're selling the name, not the furniture. Was it too much? She asked. Roy picked his buckets back up. Rain was coming off the awning in a sheet behind him. We're on 4 days a week since March, he said. Essie's finishing a chair line where the crest rail's stapled. Stapled, Junie. I've got a kid on the CNC who's the best natural hand I've seen in 20 years, and I have him cutting laminate panels 40 hours a week. He looked out at the parking lot. No, it wasn't too much. That night in the garage, June built a small walnut side table for a client in Alder Creek and did not turn on the radio. She cut the through tenons long and wedged them, so the joint showed on the outside of the leg like a seam nobody had bothered to hide, a little dark oval with a bright line through it, the way her father had done it for 40 years. He called it the honest joint. If you have to hide how a thing is made, he used to say, with his glasses down his nose and a chisel in his fist, you made it wrong. It was the sort of line that sounded like philosophy in a workshop and like nonsense in a boardroom, and June had heard it so many times as a teenager that she had rolled her eyes into a permanent shape. She was cleaning up at 11 when her phone lit on the bench. The email had a subject line like a dentist's appointment, meeting request, Thursday 10, Drew. The sender was an executive assistant at Kessler Industrial Group in Charlotte, and the body was 4 lines long, and the 4th one made June put down the rag and read the whole thing again from the top. Mr. Kessler would like to discuss the future of the Dunbar facility with you directly. She stood in her garage with sawdust on her forearms and her father's chisel in her hand, and understood with a cold and total clarity that she had made a mistake 3 weeks ago on the telephone, and that she was going to drive to Charlotte anyway. The Kessler Industrial Group occupied floors 31 through 36 of a glass building in Charlotte, and June spent 11 minutes in the lobby learning that she had dressed wrong. Not badly. Wrong. She had put on the charcoal jacket she wore to funerals and client presentations, and it was a good jacket, and every woman who crossed that lobby was wearing something that made it look like a costume of a jacket. She noticed her own hands next. Short nails, a healed split across the left thumb knuckle, a burn scar from a router bit shaped like a comma. She had thought about gloves that morning and had been briefly, sincerely ashamed of herself and had left them in the van. Then she thought, my hands built things, and she stopped looking at them. A man named Miles Grant collected her at 10:04. He was maybe 35, vice president of something called portfolio operations, and he had a way of walking half a step ahead that meant she spent the whole hallway looking at his back. Big fan of the piece in the ledger, he said over his shoulder, and smiled to show he was joking, which he was not. Very evocative. Selling the name, not the furniture. Did you write that yourself, or did the reporter give it to you? I said it, she wrote it down. Sure, that's how it works. He badged them through a door. Adrian's had a morning. Try to be brief. Adrian Kessler was smaller than June expected and much stiller. He came around the desk to shake her hand, and he did it properly, squared up, eye contact, one pump, and he did not comment on her grip, which she had braced for. He was 62, silver, precise, in a sweater instead of a suit, and the whole office had been arranged by someone with excellent taste to communicate that Adrian Kessler did not need to communicate anything. Walter Halloway, he said, sitting. I met him twice. He explained wood grain to me for 40 minutes on the second occasion. I understood perhaps a third of it, and I've thought about it more often than most things I did understand. He said it without warmth and without irony, as a man laying a true fact on the table because true facts were useful. I was sorry to hear he'd passed. I've run the numbers for 11 years and I know exactly how much money that building loses on a good month. But I'm not required to believe in you to be sincere. He almost smiled. Take the win, Ms. Halloway. Most people never get offered the thing they've been complaining about. She thought about the lawyer's office in 2014. The room had smelled like carpet glue and old coffee. Her father had a pen in his hand and had been holding it for a while, and when the lawyer said, "Whenever you're ready, Walt," he had looked up at June, not at the paper, at her, and he had asked, out loud, in front of 4 strangers, "You think this is right, kiddo?" He had never once in his life asked her permission for anything. Not for the truck, not for the second mortgage, not for the year he took her out of school on Fridays to teach her the sander, and she had been 29 and exhausted and holding a spreadsheet she'd built herself at 3 in the morning, and she had said, "I think it's the only thing left, Dad." And he had nodded and signed, and then he had pushed the paper across to her, because the LLC named them both, and she had signed under him, and her signature came out smaller than usual, and she had hated that and had never told a single person. He never blamed her. Not once, not in 3 years, not at the end. That was the problem. If he had blamed her, she could have argued. "I'd like the numbers," June said, "not the summary. Trial balance, aged payables, the last 24 months of unit costs by SKU, the bellwether master agreement, the equipment leases, the workers' comp file, and whatever you've got on the roof." Miles blinked. The roof. Building 2. It was going in 2013. If it's still going, that's $90,000, and I'd like to know whether it's mine. There was a pause of a very particular quality. Kessler looked at her for a moment longer than was comfortable, and June had the impression of being reweighed on a better scale, and of the result not mattering at all. "Give her everything," he said to Miles. Then, to June, standing, "Friday, close of business. After that, I file the WARN notice and we begin the shutdown on the 15th. I'd rather not. The write-off is uglier than the gift, and I'd have to go stand in that parking lot and say words." He walked her to the door himself, which she had not expected. "For what it's worth, if you take it, I'd advise you to sell the 14 acres inside a year and put the money somewhere that grows. There's no shame in a soft landing." June carried the folder down 31 floors and did not open it in the elevator. She sat in her van in a parking garage in Charlotte, with her hands on the wheel at 10 and 2 like a teenager taking a test. Then she drove 90 minutes north, past her own turnoff, past the feed store, and pulled onto the gravel at the gate on Route 9 at 10 minutes to 6 in the evening, with the shift letting out and 61 people walking to their cars in the last of the light. none of whom knew yet that a woman was sitting in a van at the fence deciding whether to own their lives. She read the folder until 4 in the morning at her own kitchen table, with a legal pad on her left, and a mug she kept refilling and forgetting, and by 2 she had stopped feeling anything about it and started working. That was the part of herself she trusted most and liked least, the switch that threw somewhere behind her sternum and turned grief into a task list. It had gotten her through her father's estate in 11 days. It got her through the aged payables in 3 hours. The picture was not complicated, which was the worst thing about it. Halloway Furniture built 4 product families. 3 of them lost money by design. They existed to fill trucks. The 4th, a bedroom line, made a thin, honest margin and was being discontinued in the fall. Bellwether Home, a chain with 206 stores, accounted for 78% of volume on a master agreement that had been renegotiated downward twice, and the current unit price on the flagship dining chair was, by June's arithmetic on the back of an envelope at 3:15 in the morning, $4.11 below what it cost to make. The agreement came up for renewal in 94 days. Every experienced instinct June had said Bellwether already knew what it was going to do about that, and had not bothered to say so, because when you are 78% of somebody, you do not have to announce things. At 4, she wrote a single line at the bottom of the page, 7 weeks of cash after Kessler's support stops, underlined it once, and went to lie down for 90 minutes without expecting to sleep, and slept. Roy met her at the gate at 5:40 on Friday morning, with 2 coffees and the look of a man who had not told his wife where he was going. "You want the tour or you want the truth?" "Both. Truth second. I want to see it clean first." The smell was wrong. That was the first thing, and it hit her before she was 10 feet inside the building. Not bad, just wrong, the way a stranger's house is wrong. A furniture plant is supposed to smell like cut oak and hot sandpaper and a little bit of scorch. This smelled like hot glue and something faintly chemical underneath it, the sweetish plastic ghost of melamine, and the dust on the beams was pale where it should have been red-brown. Her father used to say you could stand in the doorway with your eyes shut and know what kind of month it was. June stood in the doorway with her eyes open and knew. They walked the line before shift, in the grey light through the clear-story windows, past machines she had known as a child, the way other children know their cousins. The big Cantech was gone. The 4-head moulder had been sold in 2019. She'd read that at 2 in the morning, and it had been an entry on a schedule. Standing in the empty concrete rectangle where it had lived, with the anchor bolts still sticking up, was a different piece of information entirely. What remained was arranged for throughput. It was not a stupid layout. Somebody competent had optimized this floor for a business that made cheap things quickly, and they had done a decent job of it, and every decision was correct, and the sum of them was a building that could no longer make anything worth buying. At the end of the line, on a rack, sat 40 finished dining chairs waiting for the truck. June picked one up by the crest rail, turned it over, and held it out at arm's length under the light. "Go on," Roy said. The crest rail joined the back posts with a stub tenon about 3/8 deep, glued and, she tilted it, stapled from behind through the inside face where nobody would look, 2 staples per side, crown down. Someone had filled and touched them up. The touch-up was actually skilled. That was somehow the most upsetting detail on the entire chair. A person with real ability had spent real time hiding 2 staples. 18 months, Roy said. That's what it does. It's fine, 18 months. And then somebody leans back in it at Thanksgiving, and it opens up like a book. We know, we told them. Engineering ran a test and said the failure rate's inside the warranty reserve. He shrugged with one shoulder. They're not wrong. It is. It's a chair, Roy. I know what it is. Shift started at 6. June stood by the sander with her coffee going cold and watched 61 people come in through the side door with their lunches, and about half of them looked at her, and about a third recognized her, and one woman stopped dead in the aisle with her hand over her mouth. Estelle Marchetti had been finishing at Halloway since she was 22 years old. She was 58 now, with reading glasses pushed up into grey-streaked hair and forearms like a farmer's, and she crossed the floor and took June's face in both hands, the way you'd take a bowl out of a cupboard. "Look at you," Essie said. "Look at your father's chin on you. Hi, Essie, are you buying us?" Straight out, no runway. Behind her, the line was starting up, and people were pretending not to listen with tremendous effort. Because there's a rumor, and I've been having it 3 days and it's making me stupid. June had spent the drive over deciding not to lie to anybody in this building ever, about anything, starting now. It was the only asset she was sure she had. I'm deciding today, she said. I have until 5 o'clock. Essie let go of her face. Well, she said, then let me show you what we're finishing. And marched her to the booth and did not ask a single further question. And June understood that she had just been given the closest thing to a vote of confidence that a woman like Essie was ever going to hand a stranger with the right last name. The kid on the CNC was 24 and worked with his headphones half off, one ear listening to the machine. Danny Okafor had come out of the community college program in Sanford, had been at Halloway 2 years, and was cutting laminate panels at a rate that suggested he had figured out the toolpath was inefficient and had quietly rewritten it. June asked him one question about climb cuts and got a 4-minute answer with his hands moving in the air, and when he realized who she was, he went the color of raw cherry and said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I talk a lot about this." "Don't be sorry. Where'd you learn the tenon geometry? That's not in the community college curriculum." Danny hesitated. Then he wiped his palms on his jeans, went to the low cabinet under the bench, and came back with a 3-ring binder, swollen and split, its cover gone soft as cloth. It was the 1994 Halloway and Daughters trade catalogue. Someone had photocopied the exploded construction diagrams from the back, and Danny had annotated them in pencil, page after page, in a hand that got neater as it went. "Roy gave it to me my first month," he said. "I make stuff out of scrap on Saturdays. I clock it, I don't take material." He said it fast, the way you say a thing you have been rehearsing in case you ever got caught. "I just want to know how to build it right one time, in case somebody ever asks you to," June thought. The office smelled like paper. Vera Lindqvist had run it since 2004, and had the terrible calm of a person who has personally decided more than once which invoice waits another week. She had the trial balance already printed and flagged with 3 colors of tab. She confirmed the 7 weeks. She corrected it to 6.5 because June had missed the quarterly workers' comp installment on the schedule, and then she said, without any change of expression at all, "I have paid this payroll 41 times, without knowing on Tuesday whether I could. If you're going to be another person who tells everybody it'll be fine, I would rather you didn't take it." "I'm not going to tell anybody it'll be fine." Vera looked at her for a second. "All right," she said, and pulled a 4th color of tab out of the drawer. The archive was in Building 2 at the back, behind a plywood partition somebody had put up to make a break room that nobody used. 200 linear feet of drawings on vellum, rolled and labeled in her father's block printing. Sample chairs on a rack, 30 years of them. A wall of test joints sawn in half and screwed to a board, each one labeled with a date and a failure mode in grease pencil. Her father's teaching wall, which he had built for employees and had used mostly on his own children. And on every one of the old pieces, in walnut and white oak and a cherry that had gone the color of dark honey, that little dark oval on the outside of the leg with a bright wedge of contrasting wood driven through it. The honest joint. 12 years of dust on it, and the wood underneath still tight. June put her hand on the back of a 1996 rocker and found she could not immediately take it off again. "There's one more thing," Roy said from the doorway. He hadn't come in. "And then I'll leave you be and you'll do whatever you're going to do, and I won't say another word about it either way." He led her to the far corner, past the drawing racks, where something stood alone under a moving blanket, gone stiff with age. He pulled the blanket off without ceremony. It was a lounge chair, or most of one. Steam-bent white oak, a low seat, a back with a compound curve that June had never seen in any Halloway drawing in her life, and it was beautiful in a way that made her breath catch and go sideways, and it was unfinished. No arms. The rear joints dry fit, no glue, the wedges cut but not driven. A pencil line across the crest rail with a question mark beside it. "He worked on it nights the last year," Roy said. "Wouldn't show it to anybody. It's got something wrong with it. It racks under load, back left, you sit down hard, and you feel it move. He couldn't get it out. 6 months, he couldn't get it out." Roy cleared his throat and looked at the ceiling. Week before he passed, he called me over to the house and told me to keep it in the building. Not the house, the building. And he said, he stopped. Started again. He said, when Junie asks what's wrong with it, don't you tell her. She'll see it in about a minute and she needs to be the one who sees it. June stood in the dust with her hand on the cold, bent oak and felt 12 years of correct arithmetic come apart very quietly in her chest. It was 9:20 in the morning. She had until 5. She sat with the chair for 2 hours before she called, and it did not tell her anything. That was the thing she could not get past. She went over it the way she had gone over the Merritt's cabinets, palms flat, knocking, listening. She loaded the back corner with her own weight and felt the rack come through the frame, back left, exactly where Roy said, a movement so small you could argue about whether it existed. She checked the joint shoulders. She checked the grain run-out on the rear post. She checked whether the bend had been left too long on the form. Everything was right. Her father had built a chair in which every single joint was correct, and the chair still moved. And he had spent 6 months of his last year failing to find it, and he had told a 63-year-old foreman with total confidence that his daughter would see it in about a minute. She did not see it in a minute. She sat on an upturned crate in a cold building and did not see it at all, and at 4:40 in the afternoon she went out to the gravel lot where there was signal and called Charlotte and said, "I'll take it." They signed Monday at 10. Miles Grant had prepared a photograph, the two of them, the folder, the window, and June said she would do it in the plant, in front of Building 1, with Roy and Essie and Vera in the frame, or not at all. Miles explained that this was not the standard visual approach. Kessler, without looking up from the signature page, said, "Do it her way." And that was the last direct sentence Adrian Kessler spoke to June Halloway for 11 months. The press release used the word stewardship twice. It was picked up by 2 trade papers and the Ledger, which ran it under a photograph of June looking, she thought, like somebody's aunt who had wandered into a groundbreaking. The comments were kind in the way that funerals are kind. She held the all-hands Tuesday at 6:05 a.m., standing on a pallet by the sander because the break room only fit 30. 61 people. She had written 4 pages the night before and left them in the van. "You know who I am and you know what happened yesterday," she said. "Here's what I know. We have about 6.5 weeks of money. Bellwether is 78% of what we ship, and their contract comes up in 90 days, and I don't believe they're going to renew it on terms we can live on. Nobody is coming to rescue this. I'm not rich. I put everything I have into the account this morning, and it bought us 4 days. Somebody in the back said, 'Jesus.' Yeah." June let it sit. 3 things, and then you can go to work. 1. No layoffs this month. I can't promise past that, and if I ever do promise you something, it's going to be true, so I'm not promising past that. 2. Starting today, we stop stapling the crest rails. Roy will show you the change. It's 4 minutes a chair, and I know what 4 minutes a chair does to the standard. We're going to eat it. 3. And here her voice did something she had not authorized, and she stopped and took a breath. And Essie said quietly, "Take your time, honey," which nearly finished her. 3. If any of you know something about how to build furniture that nobody has asked you about in 12 years, my door is open. And I mean that operationally, not emotionally. I need it. Go to work. 2 people quit that week. A shipping clerk with a job offer in Greensboro he'd been sitting on, and a line supervisor named Curtis who told Vera on the way out that he had a family and couldn't spend 6 weeks watching a woman lose a factory. June thought about that sentence more than she wanted to. She also thought that he was not being cruel. He was being accurate about the odds, and if he had asked her to bet, she would have bet with him. Wednesday, she and Vera built the triage on the whiteboard in the office. Her own salary 0 indefinitely, which Vera argued about for 4 minutes and lost. The bedroom line not discontinued and immediately repriced upward 11% for the 6 independent retailers who bought it, 5 of whom said yes without a callback, which told June something important and slightly nauseating about how long that line had been underpriced. The 2 loss-making filler families, quoted at their real cost on the next Bellwether PO, with the number written out on a single sheet and no apology attached, and white oak. She needed white oak in quartersawn in quantity for something she had not told anybody about yet. Nakamura Hardwoods was 40 minutes east, a yard and a dry kiln and an office with a wood stove in it, and Theo Nakamura listened to her whole pitch. 6 minutes she'd practiced it, with his arms folded and a pencil behind his ear, and an expression of complete, courteous immovability. "No," he said. "Theo. June." He was 45, third generation on that yard, and he had a way of saying no that did not sound like a door closing so much as a fact being reported. "In 2016, your company owed me $11,000 at 60 days. In 2017, that was 90 days. In 2019, a young man in Charlotte with excellent hair told me on the telephone that my terms were, quote, not competitive in the current environment, and offered me $120. I told him what he could do and he laughed at me. And I have not sold that building a board foot since, and my accountant still brings it up." He shrugged. "Different owner, same building. I've got a payroll too." "That's fair." "It's not fair. It's just true. Fair would be me lending you the wood because your dad sold me my first truck at half what it was worth." He picked up the pencil, looked at it, put it back. "Cash for the first load. I can do cash for the first load. And I'll hold 1,200 board feet of the quarter sawn out of the January cut. 30 days, nobody else sees it. After 30 days I sell it, and I won't feel bad. And you're not allowed to ask me for 31. He finally uncrossed his arms. "What are you building that needs quarter-sawn white oak and can't wait?" June hesitated. It was the first time in 11 days she had considered saying it out loud. "Something my father didn't finish," she said. Theo looked at her for a moment. Then he wrote a number on a scrap of poplar with a carpenter's pencil, slid it across and said, "That's cost plus 4. Don't tell anybody, they'll all want to be pitied." And when she laughed, an actual laugh, the first one since Charlotte, he looked briefly and unmistakably pleased with himself, and then went to find his loader keys with an efficiency that fooled neither of them. The first order came Friday, and it came from the article. Nadia Cruz was a designer in Asheville doing the restoration of the Larkin, a 1920s hotel dining room, and she had read "Founder's Daughter." They're selling the name, not the furniture, 3 weeks earlier, and clipped it the way designers clip things without knowing why. She needed 44 side chairs in 6 weeks. She had a drawing. It was, June saw at a glance, a slightly clumsy hand redraw of a Halloway chair from 1996, the kind of thing that happens when a designer photographs an antique in a client's house and gives it to a draftsman. "I know it's a small job," Nadia said on the phone. "Everyone's told me 6 weeks is impossible, and everyone quoted me for something I didn't ask for." June looked at the drawing. She looked at the empty rectangle in the concrete where the four-head moulder used to be. She looked at Danny Okafor through the office window, cutting laminate panels, with the swollen 1994 catalogue under his bench. "It's not impossible," she said. "It's expensive, and it'll be right, and I'll have a number for you Monday." She hung up and stood there with her hand still on the phone and let herself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. 44 chairs, $11,000 of margin against a 6.5-week clock, a rounding error, nothing, a thimble of water in a house fire. She felt it anyway. Then she went to tell Roy. She never got there. Vera intercepted her in the corridor outside the archive with the morning mail still in her hand, and she was holding one envelope out separately from the others, the way you hold something you don't want to be touching. "This came addressed to the owner," Vera said. "I opened it before I remembered that's you now." The letterhead read, "Caro Development Partners." It was a follow-up. It referenced our continued discussions regarding the Route 9 parcel and the previously indicated valuation of the 14 acres at highest and best use residential, and it expressed confidence that the parties could proceed to definitive documentation following the ownership transition. Following the transition, not upon learning of, following. June's eyes went to the date at the top of the page and stayed there. The letter had been written 19 days before Adrian Kessler ever asked her to come to Charlotte. June called the number on the letterhead at 8:15 the next morning from the archive, sitting on the crate in front of her father's unfinished chair, because it was the only room in the building where nobody would come looking for her. Dale Prewitt of Caro Development Partners was delighted to hear from her. He was delighted for 11 straight minutes. He talked about the corridor and the school district, and the way Dunbar was, in his phrase, finally getting some tailwind, and he told her that 14 contiguous acres with municipal water at that end of Route 9 was the kind of parcel that came along twice in a career, and June let him run, because people who are delighted will eventually say something true just to fill a silence. "Mr. Prewitt," she said when he paused for breath, "your letter says continued discussions. We'd had some indication the parcel would likely become available in the near term, and we'd done our diligence in advance, which frankly is a service to you, because it means I can move fast when you're ready. Indication from whom? I'd have to check my notes." "Check them." He laughed warmly, the way you laugh at a child who has said something almost clever, and told her he'd be in touch after the holidays, and that in the meantime she should feel absolutely no pressure at all, which was the only sentence in the entire conversation that she believed was a lie. He knew he was telling. She told 2 people. She sat Roy and Vera down in the office with the door shut and put the letter on the desk between them, and watched Roy read it twice, moving his lips slightly on highest and best use. Residential. 60 houses, Roy said, on the Kilnyard. Probably 90. Vera took her glasses off. You have to tell them. Not yet. June, if I stand on that pallet and tell 59 people that the land under their feet is worth more than they are, half of them start looking for work on Monday, and I don't blame them, and then I can't build anything, and then it's true. June heard her own voice come out flatter than she meant. I'll tell them. I'll tell them when I have one single thing to say afterward that isn't, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. Vera put her glasses back on. She did not say that's how it starts, and she did not have to, and June carried the unsaid version of it around in her chest for the next 9 weeks, like a stone in a shoe. The back bay was Danny's idea technically, though he offered it so carefully that it took June a minute to notice he was proposing something. Building 2 had a corner near the archive with 3-phase power, a decent slab, and nothing in it but pallets of obsolete drawer glides. If they cleared it, the Larkin job could run there without touching the main line. Roy hated it immediately and said so with his arms folded. You're pulling Danny off the router and Marissa off assembly for 6 weeks to build 44 chairs. Bellwether's schedule doesn't move because you found a hotel. I know. Then you know we go from 4 days to about 3.5, and the men know what that means, and they'll... Roy! June put both hands flat on the bench. We're going to lose Bellwether, not maybe. In February or in April, and they'll be polite about it. If the only thing this building knows how to do when that happens is make their chair at their price, then we shut the doors in the spring, and Prewitt puts 90 houses on the Kilnyard, and everybody in this county says the Halloway girl couldn't do it either. She straightened up. I'd rather lose half a day a week and have something to sell in March. If you think that's wrong, tell me now and tell me why, and I'll listen, because you've been here 34 years, and I've been here 11 days. Roy looked at the concrete for a while. I think it's a hell of a bet, he said. I think your father would have made a smaller one. He unfolded his arms. I'll move the glides. They built the Larkin chairs the hard way, because there was no other way left in the building. Without the 4-head molder, they could not run stock, so they bought roughs on, and Danny wrote toolpaths that let the CNC do the roughing on the curved back stiles from thicker blanks, wasting an obscene amount of wood, and June sat with him for 2 nights working out how to bring the waste down to merely embarrassing. The mortises they cut on an ancient hollow chisel machine Roy resurrected out of the mezzanine. The tenons they wedged, visible through the outside face of the stile, because that was the drawing and because June was not going to build the first authored Halloway chair in 12 years and hide how it was made. Essie came back to the bay 2 afternoons a week and took over the finish, and on the 3rd day she found June sanding a stile at the bench and stood watching for a full minute before she said, You're going with the grain like you're apologizing to it. I'm rusty. You're not rusty, you're scared. Rusty is here. She tapped her own hand. Scared is here. She tapped her sternum, took the block out of June's fingers, and did 4 strokes that sounded completely different and gave it back, and did not explain further. And June thought about that for the rest of the week. The first 3 samples went to load test on a Thursday. It was June's test, a jig she'd built herself, a strap and a lever and a bathroom scale, crude and honest, and the 3rd chair opened up at 240 pounds on the left rear with a sound like a knuckle cracking. The whole bay went quiet. June turned the chair over. It took her 90 seconds to find it, and about 4 to understand it. And when she did, she sat back on her heels and said, out loud, to 11 people, "That's mine." She had specified the blanks. She had let Danny nest the back styles on the sheet to save material. Her call, she'd signed the layout. And on that third chair, the grain ran out through the curve, so the style was, in the last 3 inches, a stack of short fibers pretending to be a piece of wood. It was the exact mistake she had spent 20 years catching in other people's work. She had made it because she was trying to save $11 of oak. "Not yours," Danny said, going red. "I nested it. I should have—" "You laid out what I approved. I approved it because I was cheap and in a hurry." June stood and put the failed style up on the bench where everyone could see it and got a grease pencil out of her apron. She wrote the date on it, and grain runout rushed the nest, JH, and walked it back to the archive and screwed it to her father's teaching wall in the empty space at the bottom right, under a joint he had labeled in 1998. Nobody said anything. But by Monday, somebody had put a second failure up beside hers, unprompted. A glue stave labeled and dated signed Monsieur Ruiz, and by the end of the month there were 9, and Vera started calling it the Wall of Shame, and then stopped calling it that when she noticed the men were proud of being on it. They rebuilt the 3 samples, all 3 held at 400. June was in the office on the Friday, initialing a check run she could not entirely cover, when Vera put her head in with the phone against her shoulder and a very particular expression. "Bellwether," she said. "Deanna Pyle. She wants to move the renewal meeting." June's stomach dropped about an inch. The renewal was scheduled for the 2nd week of February. To when? Vera looked at the phone and then at her. "Thursday," she said. She brought 2 chairs. Roy had argued about it in the parking lot at 6 in the morning in the cold, with his breath going up in the sodium light. "You don't walk into Bellwether carrying furniture, Junie. You walk in carrying a folder," and June had kept loading the van. One was a Halloway dining chair off the finished rack, the flagship, the $4.11 below cost one. The other was the same chair built the way they had been building them since her 2nd morning as owner. Crest rail through tenoned and wedged, no staples, 4 minutes more. Bellwether Homes' corporate campus was 3 buildings and a retention pond outside Greensboro, and the conference room had a view of the pond. Deanna Pyle was about 50 in a cardigan, with a laptop and a printed deck and a lanyard, and she stood up to shake June's hand and said, "I'm sorry about the reschedule. It wasn't my idea," which told June a great deal before either of them had sat down. The deck took 9 minutes. It had a slide called Partnership Realignment with a photograph of a family eating dinner. 6%, Deanna said, across the program, effective with the spring order. Terms move from 90 to 120. In exchange, we'd be able to talk about placement in an additional 41 doors for the fall, which is real volume, and I'd put it in writing. June had been prepared for 6. She had run 6 on a legal pad at her kitchen table 3 separate nights, from 3 different directions, hoping for a version where it worked. "Can I show you something first?" "Please." June brought the 2 chairs in from the hallway and set them side by side on the carpet, and turned the first one over on the table, like a vet with a dog. "This is what you buy from us. 2 staples through the inside face of the crest rail, crown down, filled and touched up by a woman named Estelle Marchetti, who has been finishing furniture for 36 years and is extremely good at making that invisible. It holds about 18 months of ordinary use. Your engineering group has the failure data. It's inside your warranty reserve, so on your side of the wall, it's a rounding error." She set it down. "This is the same chair built right, through tenon, wedged, visible on the outside face. 4 minutes more of labor and about $1.10 of material, and it will outlive both of us." Deanna looked at the second chair for a while. She reached out and turned it a little to see the joint. "And what's your number?" she said. 9% up, not 6 down." June put a single sheet on the table, face up. "That's the cost sheet, not the one Kessler's people sent you. Actual material, actual labor at what we actually pay, actual overhead absorbed at our real volume, no allocation games. At your current price, we lose $4.11 on every chair, and we've been losing it since the last realignment. And the way that got paid for was by taking the hardwood out, and then the joinery, and then the day. My people work 4 days a week. That's not a labor story, that's an arithmetic story, and it ends with a closed building either way. 9 up, and I'll take the same volume, and I'll put a 20-year structural warranty on it in writing, which nobody in this category will do. Deanna Pyle did not look at the sheet. That was the thing June noticed, and the thing she understood about 4 seconds later, in the same way she had understood Adrian Kessler's office. "You already have another supplier," June said. The room got very quiet. Out the window a heron landed on the retention pond and stood there like it had been paid to. "I have a number I have to hit," Deanna said at last. "I've had it since August. I don't have room to have an opinion about your chair, and I want you to hear that I'm not saying I don't have an opinion." She closed the laptop. "There's a group in Vietnam tooling up on the program. First containers land in September. They're not better. They're 11% cheaper landed, and they can hold it for 3 years, and my company has decided that's the same thing. So, this meeting is a bridge. This meeting is 2 more seasons at 6 down, and then a very kind letter." Deanna said it evenly, without flinching, and June respected her for that more than she wanted to. "I'm not enjoying this, Ms. Halloway. I've done it 4 times this year." June sat back. 2 more seasons. She did the arithmetic where she sat, which took no time at all because she had been living inside it for a month. 2 seasons at 6 down meant losing about $9 a chair instead of 4. It meant the plant stayed full and busy and loud until September, and every hour of that would be spent making things at a loss for a customer who had already replaced them, and there would be no money and no time and no people left over to build anything else. And in September, the letter would come, and the account would be empty, and Dale Prewitt would call her after the holidays. It meant dying with certainty, on a schedule, doing work she would be ashamed of, and being able to tell 59 people every Friday that everything was fine. The other option was that 78% of her revenue ended in the next 10 minutes. "No," June said. Deanna blinked. "I'd encourage you to take a week." "If I take a week, I'll take it." June stood up and picked up the good chair. "Not because it's the right answer, because I'll want the noise. There's a man who told me a month ago that people say they stopped caring when they don't want to read the statements, and he was about 40% right, and this is the 60. She held the chair against her hip. "I can't spend my last 9 months making a thing I'd take a staple out of. That's not a principle, it's just, I can't. I'd rather find out fast." She got as far as the door before Deanna spoke again. "Miss Halloway." June turned. Deanna Pyle had not stood up. She had her hands flat on the closed laptop, and she looked at the second chair, the good one, for slightly longer than a person looks at furniture. "Markets in April," she said. "If you're going to show that, don't show it to buyers like me. We can't say yes to anything. Get off the main floors and get up on 9 in one of the old buildings, where the designers are, the ones doing hotels and restaurants and rich people's houses. They don't have a number they have to hit. They have a photograph they have to get." She opened the laptop again, which was a dismissal, and said to the screen, "That's not advice from Bellwether. That's just something I know." June drove 11 miles, and then pulled into a gas station and sat with both hands on the wheel and shook for about 4 minutes, the delayed kind, the kind that arrives after the thing is over and cannot be argued with. She let it happen. Then she washed her face in a bathroom that smelled like bleach, bought a coffee she didn't want, and called the plant. "It's me," she said when Vera picked up. "Cancel the Thursday truck to Bellwether, and hold the spring PO, don't acknowledge it. Then get everybody on the floor at 6 tomorrow morning, all 3 shifts overlapping, and tell Roy to shut the line down for it." There was a pause on the line about 8 feet deep. "All of it?" Vera said. June looked out at the highway where the trucks were going somewhere, for somebody. "All of it," she said. "I just turned down the only customer we have, and they're going to hear it from somebody else by lunch, so it's going to be me, at 6, standing on the pallet." The line was down at 6 the next morning, which had happened 4 times in 34 years, and every person in that building knew it before they were through the door. June told them all of it: Bellwether, the 6%, the Vietnam containers landing in September, the 2 seasons, and the kind letter. She told them she had said no in the room without calling anybody, and that they could be angry about that, and that she would still have said no with a phone in her hand. Then she took the Caro letter out of her back pocket, unfolded it, and read the phrase highest and best use, residential out loud to 59 people standing on a concrete floor that 90 houses were waiting for. "I've had that for 6 weeks, and I didn't tell you," she said. "That was wrong. I told myself I was protecting the work. I was protecting myself from having to stand here without an answer." She folded it back up. "I still don't have an answer. I have about 11 weeks of money if nothing goes wrong, and a hotel job that's almost out the door, and a bedroom line that's finally priced like an adult, and a building full of people who know how to build furniture that nobody has asked us for in 12 years. That's the whole hand. I'm going to play it at market in April. Anybody who needs to go should go, and I'll write the reference myself and I won't say a word about it." Hollis Bird, 42 on the Sander since 2011, said, "You had no right to gamble our jobs on a hotel." "No," June said. "I had the legal right and not the moral one. I did it anyway, and you're owed the truth about that." Hollis stared at her, and June made herself hold it, and after a moment he nodded once, not in agreement, in receipt. 11 people left over the next 3 weeks. Hollis was one of them. He went to a plastics plant in Sanford for $2 an hour more and stopped by on his last day to shake Roy's hand, and not June's, which she decided she had earned. 48 remained. Vera moved everyone to a 4-day week that was honest instead of pretend, and June signed the paperwork with a pen that felt like it weighed 9 pounds. The Larkin chairs went out on the 14th of December, 4 days early. June drove them herself, with Danny in the passenger seat asleep before Hickory, and they carried 44 chairs into a dining room with a plaster ceiling and 12-foot windows and the smell of new paint, and set them at the tables and stepped back. Nadia Cruz walked the room without saying anything for a long time. Then she crouched by one and put her thumb on the little dark oval on the outside of the leg where the wedge came through and stayed there. "What is that?" "Through tenon, wedged. It's how the joint holds. You drive a wedge into the end of the tenon and it swells inside the mortise and locks." June cleared her throat. "My father left it showing. He said if you have to hide how a thing is made, you made it wrong." Nadia stood up and took out her phone and took 19 photographs of a leg. 3 inquiries came in that month from people who had eaten dinner at the Larkin. 2 of them were the kind of email that goes nowhere. The third was a restaurant group in Charleston that wanted 90 chairs in the fall and wanted to know with a directness June was not used to whether Halloway did custom work. It was not enough money to matter. It was the first time in 12 years that anybody had come to that building because of how something was built. Winter was a grind of small, honest numbers. The repriced bedroom line held. 2 more independents picked it up. Theo drove a load of the quarter sawn out himself on a Tuesday in January and re-upped the hold for another 30 days with an expression of enormous suffering, and then sat on his tailgate with June in the cold eating gas station sandwiches while the loader beeped somewhere behind them. "My grandfather bought that yard in 1961, he said, "and my father spent 40 years telling me it was a bad business, and it is a bad business, and I have never once considered doing anything else." He balled up the wrapper. "So, when I say I understand what you're doing, I'd like you to know it's not a compliment. It's a diagnosis." June laughed so hard she had to put the coffee down. "Prewitt," Theo said after a while, not looking at her. "Caro. He buys from a mill I sell to. His money isn't his money, June. There's a fund behind him and I don't know whose, and I'm not the guy who can find out. But somebody's writing his checks, and it isn't Dale Prewitt of Dunbar, North Carolina." "I know. I figured you did." He picked up his keys. "I'd say be careful, but you'd take it wrong. I'd take it fine." "Then be careful." He got in the truck and then rolled the window down and added in a completely different voice, "The chair, the one you won't tell me about. When you get it, I want to see it before anyone else does." And drove off before she could answer, which she thought about for the rest of the afternoon and, irritatingly, for a good part of the evening. She got it on the 11th of February at 1:20 in the morning, and it took her 4 months and about 90 seconds. She had been going at it wrong the whole time, and she had been going at it wrong for the same reason her father had. Every night she'd come back to the joints. Shoulders, fit, glue line, the seating of the wedges, the run out in the rear post, joints, joints, joints. because that was the religion of that building and she had been raised in it. The joint tells you, and every joint on that chair was clean, and she had checked them so many times she could have drawn them from memory. That night she was too tired to be smart. She had the seat frame clamped in the vise, and she leaned on the back corner to feel the rack again. And instead of watching the joint, she watched the stile, the long bent piece of white oak running up the back. And she saw it breathe. Not move. Breathe. It came back about a 16th when she let off, and it did not come all the way back. Steam-bent oak wants to be straight. You bend it over a form and set it, and it holds its shape, and it spends the rest of its life pulling gently, forever, trying to remember what it was. Her father had bent those rear stiles in a compound curve, one plane and then a second, which was more curve than that species wanted to be asked for, and then he had built a perfectly rigid frame around a piece of wood that was still arguing. The joints weren't failing. The joints were fine. They were being pushed apart from the inside by a chair that was trying to unbend itself, a 16th of an inch at a time, forever. He had never seen it because he had spent 40 years trusting joinery, and the one thing he trusted was the one place he never looked. June sat down on the floor of the archive at 1:30 in the morning and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not hard, and not for long. And mostly, she thought later, out of a kind of unbearable tenderness, because she could see him at that bench with his glasses down his nose, checking a shoulder for the 400th time, so certain that the answer had to be somewhere honest. The fix she already knew, and that was the part that took her days to forgive. You don't steam bend it. You laminate it. Rip the oak into thin plies, glue them up over the same form, and let them cure. A bent lamination has no argument left in it. It doesn't remember being straight, because none of the pieces were ever asked to be. She knew that the way she knew her own hands, because she had built curved stair rails and radiused cabinet fronts for 12 years in a rented garage for people in Alder Creek who wanted a rounded island, and she had done it 100 times, and she had felt slightly ashamed of every single one of them, kitchen work, small work, the things she did instead of the thing her father had done. The work she had been embarrassed by was the only thing in the world that could finish his chair. She built the new back over 9 days in the evenings, with Danny finding excuses to stay late, and Essie coming in on a Saturday to make the form. 11 plies at a hair over an 1/8, glued cold, clamped on the form for 24 hours. The lamination lines showed on the edge of the finished stile as a stack of fine dark seams, like the growth rings of some patient-invented tree, and June looked at that for a long time and decided not to hide it either. They wedged the through tenons and drove them home on the 20th. Roy came in on his day off in a clean shirt, which nobody mentioned. June loaded the back corner with 240 pounds, then 300, then 420, which was every plate they had. It did not move at all. The bay was very quiet. Then Danny said, "Oh my God," in a small voice, and Essie sat down in it before anybody could stop her, and leaned all the way back with her arms out like a woman on a porch in July, and started laughing. They were still standing around it at 7 that evening when Vera came out of the office with the checkbook under her arm and the reading glasses up in her hair, and said the thing she had been holding since 2 o'clock. 19 days, she said. That's payroll, the leases, and the power. 19 days and then I can't. June looked at the chair. The booth deposit for market was due Friday. 400 square feet on the 9th floor of an old building off the main campus, 6 weeks out, non-refundable, and the prototypes, and the freight, and the photography, and the 6 people she'd have to pay to stand there. It was every dollar she had left, and about 4,000 more than that. The bank said yes, which was the problem. June sat across from a commercial lender in Dunbar for 50 minutes on the last Wednesday in February, and listened to a pleasant young man explain that the operating history did not support a working capital facility, but that the 14 acres absolutely did, and that with a first lien on the real property, he could get her $300,000 inside 2 weeks. It was the easiest money she would ever be offered. It was also, precisely and exactly, Dale Prewitt's business plan with a different letterhead: put the land on the hook, miss a payment in a bad quarter, and let the parcel do what everyone had already decided it was going to do. Adrian Kessler had told her to sell it in the first year. The bank was offering to sell it for her slowly, without her having to feel anything. "No, thank you," she said, and went out to the van and sat there and swore for a while. She raised it the ugly way instead, over 9 days on the telephone. 6 independent retailers who bought the bedroom line got a call in which June Halloway told them she was launching an authored collection at market in April, that she had 5 pieces and no photographs and no history, that she was asking for a 40% deposit on a founding order for furniture that did not yet exist, and that, if she failed, they would be unsecured creditors of a company with nothing to give them. 3 said no. 2 said yes on the spot. The 6th, a woman in Charleston named Bet Ferrara, who had bought from Walter Halloway since 1994, said, "Send me the paper, and if you tell one single lie on the phone with me, June, I'll drive up there and take the sander," and wired the money the same afternoon. Nadia Cruz put her on the phone with 4 designers and shot the collection herself for the cost of the film. The Charleston restaurant group paid half their fall order up front. Theo Nakamura deferred 60 days on $11,000 of oak and told her it was a commercial decision, and Vera, who read every invoice in the building, said nothing about it in a very loud way. June sold the van, the crooked lettering, the 15 years, for $4,100 to a young guy starting a trim business, and drove the plants 1 ton after that. That hurt more than the salary had. She was surprised by how much. The total was $38,400, and it was $4,000 short. And Vera moved the equipment lease payment by 20 days, with a phone call June was not allowed to be present for. They built the collection in 6 weeks, on 4-day weeks with 48 people, 5 pieces. The lounge chair, bent laminated back wedged through tenons, the 10-year-old drawing finally answered, which Roy started calling the Walter on about the 3rd day, without asking anybody, so that by the end of the week it simply was that. The Larkinside chair refined, a dining table with breadboard ends and the tenons showing through the outside face like 4 dark eyes. A bench. A low cabinet with hand-cut dovetails that Essie insisted on because if we're doing this, we're doing it, and which cost them 9 days they did not have. Essie developed the finish herself, over 2 weeks of ruined samples, chasing a hand-rubbed oil that did not fill or flatten the lamination lines, but let them sit there, 11 fine dark seams on the edge of every curved piece, plainly visible to anyone who looked. June wrote the name on the whiteboard in the back bay on a Tuesday in March, and left it there. Nothing hidden. The 9th floor of the old Bagley Hosiery building was 3 blocks off the main campus, up a freight elevator that required a human being to operate it, and it cost less than the good floors for excellent structural reasons. They had 400 square feet, a borrowed rug, 1 card table, and 1,000 business cards Danny had designed at 2 in the morning. For the first day and a half, almost nobody came. That was the part June never left out afterward when people asked. Not the triumph, the day and a half. 41 hours of standing in a small room in a building nobody had a reason to enter, with 5 pieces of furniture that represented every dollar and every deposit and every extra minute of 48 people's lives, watching the freight elevator open for other floors. Roy wore a tie he had bought in 2009. Danny went down to the street 4 times an hour to hand cards to strangers. At 2 o'clock on the 2nd day, Essie sat down in the Walter and said, "Well, at least somebody's sitting in it," and June laughed, and then had to go stand by the window for a minute. The woman came at 4:20. She was in her 60s, in flat shoes with a canvas bag and reading glasses on a cord, and she had gotten off on 9 by mistake, looking for a showroom that had moved. She stopped in the doorway the way people stop, when they have seen something out of the corner of their eye, and their body has decided before they have. She did not say anything to June. She went straight to the Walter, put her bag on the floor, crouched down beside the rear leg with the ease of a person who had crouched beside a lot of furniture, and put her thumb on the wedge showing through the tenon. Then she ran her finger along the edge of the bent stile, over the 11 seams, and stopped. "This is laminated," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You didn't stain over it?" "No, ma'am." The woman looked up. "Why not?" "Because that's how it holds," June said. "The steam-bent version pushed itself apart for 10 years. This one doesn't argue. If somebody wants to know why the chair works, the answer's right there, and I'd rather they could see it." The woman sat down in it. She leaned back, and shifted her weight to the left rear the way people do without meaning anything by it, and June watched her feel the absolute stillness of it and saw her eyebrows move about a millimeter. Her name was Frances Okonjo-Reed. She had been buying and writing about American furniture for 31 years, and she posted 3 photographs that evening, a leg, an edge, and the whole chair, with a caption that said only, "9th floor, Bagley Building. Go up." They ran out of cards at 11 the next morning. June spent the last 2 days of market talking until she had no voice at all. Designers came in sixes, a hotel group from Savannah, 2 dealers from Chicago who argued with each other in the doorway about lead times, a young man with a camera who asked on video who had designed the lounge chair, and June, hoarse, exhausted, past the point of media training she had never had anyway, said, "My father drew it in 2016 and couldn't finish it, and he died before he did. The back is a bent lamination, which I learned building kitchen cabinets in a rented garage for 12 years. Estelle Marchetti developed the finish. Danny Okafor wrote the toolpaths and cut every curved part in the room. Roy Dunham set up the machines, and he's been doing it since 1992. There are 48 people in Dunbar, North Carolina who make this 4 days a week, and they took a pay cut to be standing here, so if you print my name on it by itself, you'll have printed something that isn't true." That was the clip that traveled. Not the chair. The clip. It went out on a Thursday, and by Sunday it had been shared by people who did not know what a through tenon was and did not need to. Miles Grant came up on the 9th floor on the last afternoon. He stood in the doorway with a market badge and a coffee and looked at the 5 pieces for a while with an expression June could not entirely read, and finally said, "Huh." And then, "This is very good," in a tone that was almost not quite respect. He did not mention Adrian Kessler, and June did not ask, and neither of them said the word land, and he left after 4 minutes and took the freight elevator down, and that was the whole conversation. Vera called it in the truck on the way home, over the sound of Danny snoring in the back seat, in a voice June had never heard her use. $206,000, Vera said, written, deposits on 190 of it. "June, we're funded through October." June pulled onto the shoulder of Interstate 85 with her hazards on and put her forehead on the steering wheel, and Roy patted her twice on the shoulder in a manner that suggested he would deny it later. The email came 4 days after they got back, from an assistant to the merchandising director of Wickham & Cole, 11 Galleries, the kind of company whose catalogue sat on the coffee tables of people who bought furniture the way other people bought cars. They wanted the entire Nothing Hidden collection, exclusive in their markets in 3 colorways. They wanted 3,000 units in the first year. June read it twice, then went out to the floor and stood in the doorway of the back bay, looking at 48 people on a 4-day week, and 1 resurrected hollow chisel mortiser, and an empty rectangle in the concrete where a moulder used to be, and did the arithmetic she already knew. At absolute maximum, running 5 days, hiring everyone she could train, the Dunbar plant could build 900. There were exactly 2 ways to get to 3,000. She could tell Wickham & Cole no, and watch the biggest opportunity of her life go to somebody else within a month. Or she could do what Adrian Kessler had done to her father's company, find the 4 minutes, find the $10, take out the part nobody sees. Marcus Deal came to Dunbar in the 2nd week of May, which June had not expected, and which she understood the moment his car turned into the gravel lot. He had come to see whether there was a real building behind the video. He was in his 40s, merchandising director for all 11 Wickham & Cole galleries, and he walked the floor for 90 minutes asking questions June liked: cycle times, moisture content, what happened to a piece that failed inspection, and he stopped in front of the empty concrete rectangle with the anchor bolts sticking out of it and said, "What lived here?" "A 4-head moulder, sold in 2019. Which is why your run rate is what it is. Which is why my run rate is what it is." In the office, with the door shut and Vera pretending to file, he put it plainly. 3,000 units, exclusive in our 11 markets, 3 colorways. That's $4.5 million at wholesale first year, and it's the last time in your life anyone will offer it to you cold. "I can build 900, June said, "running 5 days, hiring and training everyone I can find between here and Sanford, with a used moulder I don't own yet. 900 is the honest number, and if I say 3,000 in this room, I'll be lying to you before we've done any business at all." Deal nodded slowly, like a man arriving at the part of the meeting he'd rehearsed. "So we take the cost out," he said. 30%. My people have looked at it. The wedged-through tenon is beautiful, and it is also 90 seconds of hand labor per joint that a hidden steel connector does in 11. You keep the shape, you keep the finish, you keep the lamination. Nobody sees the joint anyway once it's in a photograph. You'd be at 3,000 by February, and you'd be making money on every one of them. June sat with that for a moment. It was, she thought, an extraordinarily well-made argument, and the man across from her was not a bad man, and she could feel exactly how the next 18 months would go if she said yes. 4 minutes at a time, $1.10 at a time. She could hear her father in a lawyer's office asking her whether she thought it was right. "Mr. Deal, do you know what our collection is called?" "Nothing hidden. It's very good copy." "It's not copy." June turned her hand over on the desk. "A woman named Estelle Marchetti spent years in that finish room, getting extremely good at making 2 staples disappear. It's the finest work I've ever seen anybody do, and it was in the service of a lie, and she knew it. And it cost her something every single day for 12 years. I'm not asking her to do it again with a steel connector, not for $4.5 million, and I want to be honest with you, not because I'm principled, because it's the only thing we have that nobody can copy in Vietnam by September. So what's your number?" 600 year 1. 4 of your 11 galleries. You pick which. No exclusivity because 6 independent dealers put deposits down in March when I had nothing but a whiteboard, and 2 of them are still carrying me on trust, and I'm not cutting them out now that it's convenient. She slid a sheet across. "Price holds, 22-week lead time published on the tag, and I'll put your 4 galleries in the first allocation ahead of everyone, except the people who funded it." Marcus Deal read the sheet for a long time. Then he put it in his bag, said, "That's a shame, this could have been enormous," shook her hand with real warmth, and drove back to Atlanta. June went out to the floor and told Roy she had just turned down $4.5 million. "Second time this year you've done that," Roy said, setting a fence. "You're getting good at it. Don't. I'm not being smart with you." He blew the dust off the scale and squinted at it. "I'm 63 years old, and I've watched people say yes to things like that 4 times in this building. I just never watched anybody say no." He clamped the fence down. "Your dad said yes in 06. Casket hardware contract, 60,000 units. Nearly killed us. And we made no money, and he was ashamed of it for a decade." He glanced up. "You didn't know that?" "No." "Well," he shrugged, "now you do?" Marcus Deal called 19 days later. In between, June had lived in a state she would describe afterward as an unpleasant kind of clarity. The numbers still worked without Wickham and Cole, barely the way a person with 2 jobs is fine. And she had gone ahead and hired anyway. 14 people between May and July. 3 of them had worked at Halloway before 2019. One was a 19-year-old girl from Sanford who had emailed after the video and had never touched a machine in her life, and who Roy, to everyone's astonishment, took as his own apprentice inside a week. 600, Deal said, without preamble. 4 galleries. Your price, your lead time, no exclusivity. I want it in writing that the joint doesn't change, and I want the 22 weeks printed on the tag, because I've decided that the weight is the product. A pause. I argued for the connector for 3 weeks, and my chairman asked me a question I couldn't answer, which was why anyone would drive to our gallery for a chair they could get anywhere. So, congratulations, I suppose. Vera cried in the supply closet, which she denied. The moulder was the hard part. Our forehead, used from a closing plant outside Martinsville, Virginia, $240,000, including rigging, and no bank in the county would finance it against anything except the 14 acres. June spent 11 days on the phone building an ugly little structure instead. An equipment lease secured by the machine itself at a rate that made Vera physically wince, 20% down out of the Wickham deposits and the rest against the waitlist. She was signing the lease documents on a Thursday afternoon when Vera put a call through. Ms. Halloway, Dale Prewitt, I hear congratulations are in order. The video, the market, all of it. I've been telling people I knew that building had it in her. Mr. Prewitt, listen, I won't take your time. He was, if anything, warmer than in December. Word gets around, and word is you're buying machinery and hiring, and you're financing it in ways that, forgive me, must be costing you a fortune. My partners and I would like to solve that for you. June set the pen down. We'd buy the 14 acres at a very full number. I'd say 2.1, and I'd say that in front of an appraiser, and lease it right back to you, 20 years, triple net. With a fixed escalator you'd find extremely reasonable. You keep the building, you keep the people, you keep the sign. You'd have $2 million in the bank on Monday, and you'd never have to make another phone call like the 11 you made last week. A little laugh. Nobody has to lose anything here. You'd own a furniture company instead of a real estate problem. It was, June thought, the single most reasonable-sounding sentence anybody had said to her in 12 months. She could see the moulder installed and paid for. She could see 5 days and a second shift, and Vera sleeping. She could also see year 14 of a triple net lease with a fixed escalator and a bad quarter, and a nice young man from Caro explaining that unfortunately the term was up. Mr. Prewitt, she said, in December, I asked you who'd given you the indication that this parcel would become available, and you said you'd check your notes. The pause on the line lasted just slightly too long. You know, Dale Prewitt said, I don't believe I ever did. She told Prewitt no on the Thursday and spent the following 6 weeks trying to find out who he was. It was a humbling exercise. Caro Development Partners LLC was registered in North Carolina and managed by an entity registered in Delaware. And that entity was managed by another one. And at the third layer, June found a name that belonged to a law firm in Wilmington, whose entire business was being the name on that kind of document. Vera pulled every file in the archive from the 2014 sale and found nothing, because there was nothing. Whatever had been arranged in rooms that did not generate paper, for people like them. June paid a lawyer $400 an hour for 2 hours to tell her, politely, that she could spend $20,000 and probably still not know, and that even if she did know, none of it would be illegal. It isn't a conspiracy, Ms. Halloway, the lawyer said. It's just how money is held. Miles Grant called her in August. He said he was leaving Kessler Industrial at the end of the month for a fund in Nashville, and that he'd like to buy her a cup of coffee, and they met at a diner off 85 halfway between, because neither of them wanted to do it in either town. He looked younger without the building around him, and he ordered pie and didn't eat it. I want to say up front that I'm not doing anything noble, he said. I've thought about how to make this sound noble for 2 weeks, and there isn't a version. He turned the fork over. Adrian's an LP in a fund called Rangeley, about 40%. Rangeley capitalizes 6 or 7 development companies in the Carolinas, and one of them is Caro. He doesn't sit on it, he doesn't direct it, and if you put him under oath, he'd tell you truthfully that he has never once given Dale Prewitt an instruction, and he'd be telling the truth, and it wouldn't matter. He finally looked up. He knew what the parcel was worth. He knew what would happen to your company. He didn't have to make a call. That's the whole trick. You don't have to make the call if you've already put everything where it needs to be. Why are you telling me? Miles thought about it honestly, which she gave him credit for. Because I'm 36, and I watched a woman on the 9th floor of a building. Nobody goes to name 4 employees on camera before she named herself, he said. And I have been in 300 meetings in my life, and I have never seen anybody do that. He put the fork down. And because I helped assemble the deck that put a number on your father's brand equity in 2014, and I was very proud of it at the time. June's first instinct was a lawyer. Her second was the ledger. The same reporter, the same phone, 12 months later, and she could see the headline so clearly it was almost a physical object. She wrote that email, 200 words, every fact, the letter attached. She looked at it for a long time and did not send it. And then she went out to the finish room at 9 at night, where Essie was still there because Essie was always still there. Ask me what I want to happen, June said. Essie put the rag down. What do you want to happen? I want him humiliated. June heard it come out and did not take it back. I want everybody who read that press release about stewardship to know exactly what he was doing. And I want him to have to stand somewhere and answer for it in front of people. And I have wanted that since the 14th of December, and I've been pretending it was strategy." "All right," Essie said. "And then what?" "What do you mean?" "I mean Thursday." Essie shrugged. "You get your headline Monday. Thursday we still owe $240,000 on a molder, and I've still got a girl in here who can't cut a curve. And the man's got $11 billion and a house in Palm Beach, and he'll read it in the car." She picked the rag back up. "I'm not telling you not to. I'm asking what it does on Thursday, because Thursday's the day I have to live in. June published it herself on the 14th of September, not a press release. A page on the company's own website, under the tab that had the collection on it titled "Nothing Hidden," and it contained no adjectives at all. The Caro letter from December, scanned, with the date circled. The date of Adrian Kessler's first email to her, 19 days later. The transfer documents. The terms of the sale-leaseback Prewitt had offered in July in full, including the fixed escalator and the 20-year term and the arithmetic of what that lease would cost the company by year 14. The Rangeley Fund's public filings, which anyone could pull, with the LP structure laid out flat, and one sentence noting that nothing in the structure was unlawful and that she was not alleging that it was. And then, at the bottom, under a heading of its own, "What I did wrong." I received the December letter on my 11th day as owner. I did not tell the people who work here for 6 weeks. I told myself I was protecting the work. I was protecting myself from having to stand in front of them without an answer. The people in this building had a right to know what the ground under their feet was worth on the day I knew it, and I took 6 weeks to give them that, and there is no version of this page that is honest without that paragraph in it. Miles Grant's name did not appear anywhere on it. June had 2 sources for everything she posted, public filings and her own mail, and she built the page so that nobody would ever need to wonder where the rest had come from. It made the page weaker. She did it anyway and never told him, and he figured it out inside a week and never said so. The reaction was not a triumph. That was the thing nobody believed afterward. The dealer in Raleigh cancelled a founding order, politely citing the current situation. Nobody wants to sell a chair with a lawsuit-shaped cloud over it, whether or not there is a lawsuit. 2 of the 14 new hires' spouses asked hard questions at dinner tables June never saw. A trade paper wrote 400 careful words that managed to convey nothing. Somebody in the comments of the video from Market said that this was a stunt and that the whole thing was marketing, and June read it at 11 at night and lay awake wondering whether it was. But Frances Okonjo-Reed wrote about it at length, and what she wrote was not about Adrian Kessler at all. It was about a small manufacturer, publishing its own worst paragraph on its own website, and it ended with a line that got printed on a card and taped inside the finish room door for the next 4 years. "A company that will show you the joint will show you the books." And Dale Prewitt stopped calling. Not immediately. He called twice more in October, and then a letter arrived from Caro Development Partners stating that the firm was withdrawing its interest in the Route 9 parcel at this time, which was 3 sentences long and signed by somebody who was not Dale Prewitt, because the method needed quiet. That was the only real thing June had learned in 12 months of being handed a knife and told it was a gift. The whole structure, the layers, the fund, the delighted phone calls, the highest and best use, did not survive being described out loud in order, with the dates showing. Kessler Industrial Group said nothing publicly, not one word. On the 28th of October, 11 months and 27 days after Adrian Kessler had said, "Do it her way," and stopped speaking to her, Vera came into the back bay, holding a printout at arm's length, with the same face she'd had the day the Caro letter came. "His assistant," she said. "Not a lawyer, the assistant." June wiped her hands. "What does it say?" 4 lines. Vera handed it over. "The last one says he'd like to come and see the plant." The molder went in on a Tuesday in October, and it went into the same holes. June had assumed they would have to core new anchors. Roy measured it 3 times over 2 days, refusing to say why, and on the second afternoon he came into the office with his hat in his hand and said, "It's the same footprint, bolt patterns identical. Whoever built the machine we sold and whoever built the machine we bought were copying the same German drawing in about 1974. He looked at the wall for a second. "It's going back in the same holes, Junie." The rigging crew set it at 4 in the afternoon, and Roy went under it with a wrench and stayed there considerably longer than the job required. And nobody in that building said a single word about it, then or ever. There were 62 people by the end of the month, one more than the day she signed. Danny Okafor's title was production engineer, which June had made up, and which he had earned in the 6 weeks he spent rebuilding the toolpaths for the new machine so that the waist on a curved back style went from 41% to 19%. He had also, at 25, become the person the new hires asked things, which was a different job entirely, and one he was worse at. And June had put him in a Thursday morning meeting with Roy for an hour a week to learn it and to be taught it, and it was going badly, and it was going. Roy's apprentice was a 19-year-old named Tam Bledsoe from Sanford, who had emailed after the video, could not cut a curve in April, and by October could set up the mortiser alone. Roy had turned 64 in August. When June had asked him in September carefully about retirement, he had said, "Ask me in a year," and then, on the way out the door without turning around, 2 more if the girl stays. The thing June could not do was raise her prices. Vera brought it in September, and again in October, and the third time she brought it in with a printed sheet and shut the door. 22 weeks was the lead time in April, Vera said. It's 14 months. 14. We have 190 people on a list who have paid a deposit to wait 14 months, and we have not raised the price of that chair $1 since a whiteboard in March when we were nobody. I know what the list is. Then you know that every hour of overtime I'm paying, and the lease on that machine, and the raise you gave the finish room, and the $400 an hour you spent on that lawyer, all of it is coming out of a price you set when you were terrified. Vera put the sheet down. 8%, it's not a stretch. It's not even ambitious. Deal told you himself in May you were leaving money on the table, and he had no reason to tell you that. June looked at the sheet and felt her hand slow down on the way to it, the way it had slowed down on 1,000 estimates in a rented garage in Alder Creek, and this time she watched herself do it. Say the thing you're not saying, Vera. All right, Vera folded her arms. You undercharge because if you never make more than you deserve, nobody can ever accuse you of taking something. You've been doing penance with a pencil since 2014, and it was your own business and your own life, and that was your right. She nodded at the door. It's 62 people now. Charge what it's worth, or you'll be running a charity that employs them right up until the day it can't. June signed the price change that afternoon. 8%. 4 people came off the wait list. 186 stayed. Elaine flew in from Portland the 3rd weekend of October, which she had not done in 6 years, and they sat on the porch of June's rented house with a bottle of wine that Elaine had brought, and June had no glasses for. I read the page, Elaine said. The one on the website, the part at the bottom. Everybody read the part at the bottom. I want to tell you something, and then I'm going to go to bed, and you can do whatever you want with it. Elaine turned her glass on her knee. Dad called me the night before you signed. 9-10 o'clock our time, he'd already decided. He'd been decided for a week. He'd talked to the bank. He'd talked to Roy. He had the whole thing in his head. He told me he was going to ask you in the room, in front of the lawyers. And I said, why would you do that to her? And he said, she stopped, started again. He said, because if I ask her when it's just the 2 of us, she'll fight me for another year and we'll lose the house too. And because I want her to have said it, I want her to know she chose it so that when she's 50, she can look at the thing and know it was hers. June sat very still. He wasn't asking your permission, Elaine said. He was giving you the only thing he had left to give you. And he did it clumsily because he was a stubborn old man who did everything clumsily, and it cost you 12 years, and I have hated him for it about 4 times a year since. She drank some of the wine. And I left June. I got on a plane in 2011 and I sent flowers in 2017, so I'm the last person who gets to hand you anything. But I've had that in my mouth for 9 years, and you were never going to ask me for it. They sat out there until it got cold. It did not fix anything, and June had stopped believing in fixing by then. It moved something about an inch, which she had learned was most of what moving ever was. Adrian Kessler came to Dunbar on the 31st of October, alone, driving himself, in a car nobody looked at twice. He was 63 now, and looked it. He walked the floor for an hour and a half, and asked good questions, and he asked them of the people doing the work rather than of June. which surprised her. Essie got 8 minutes about the oil, and Tam Bledsoe went scarlet and explained a mortise setup to a man whose name was on $400 million of industrial property, and did not know it until 3 days later, when somebody told her. In the back bay, he stopped in front of the Walter. "May I?" "That's what it's for." He sat down in it. He leaned back and shifted, and did the thing everybody did, and was quiet for a while. "Rangeley," he said at last, to the ceiling, "I want to say the true thing rather than the defensible one, because you'd know the difference and I'd rather not waste the afternoon. I never gave Prewitt an instruction. I also never had to. And I knew that when I made you the offer, and if you had asked me in that room in November whether there was anything else I should tell you, I would have said no. And that would have been a lie by any standard I'd apply to somebody else." He rested his hands on the arms of the chair. "I divested the LP position in September. I'd like to tell you it was conscience. It was position management. The page you put up made it an exposure. Conscience arrived about a week later, which I've noticed is usually the order. June had prepared for a number of things. She had not prepared for that. I'm not going to apologize," Kessler said, "because you'd hear it as an ask, and it would be. I'll say this instead. I have made a very great many things cheaper. 40 years. I'm extremely good at it, and I've kept more people employed doing it than sentiment ever has, and I'd argue that with you for 6 hours, and I'd win a fair amount of it." He looked around the bay, at the wall of failures, screwed up board by board, dated and signed, and going on 200 now. At Essie's rag on the bench, at the empty rectangle in the concrete that was no longer empty. "I have never once," he said, "made a thing that anyone was willing to wait 14 months for." He asked before he left whether she'd take an investment. 20%, minority, no board seat, at a valuation he named that made Vera put her hand over her mouth in the doorway. June said no. He asked whether she'd let him introduce her to 4 other operators in his portfolio, older buildings, similar bones, and June said she'd think about that one, and meant it, and did. At the door, he stopped and put his coat over his arm. "You'll hear this eventually, so you may as well hear it correctly," he said. "The Vietnam program landed in September. The chairs came in with a moisture problem. They'd been kilned to the wrong spec for this market, and about a third of the first 2 containers came apart in the stores inside 11 weeks. Bellwether restructured the sourcing group at the end of the month." Something cold moved through June's chest before he finished the sentence. "Deanna Pyle," Kessler said, "was let go on the 26th. It wasn't her program. Somebody had to carry it." He shook June's hand and drove himself back to Charlotte, and June stood in the gravel lot in the November cold for a long time with her phone in her hand, and the last thing Deanna Pyle had ever said to her going around and around. "That's not advice from Bellwether. That's just something I know." Deanna Pyle met her at a coffee place in Greensboro in the 2nd week of November, 6 weeks unemployed, and she sat down and said, before June had finished taking her coat off, "If you've come to be gracious about it, I'd genuinely rather you didn't. I came to offer you a job." Deanna looked at her for 4 full seconds. "I said no to you," she said, "in a room with a slide about partnership realignment. I sat there and told you about the containers and let you walk out. You also told me to get off the main floors and go up to 9, and I did. And there is a company standing today because of it." June wrapped both hands around the cup. "I need somebody who can talk to buyers because I can't. I get in a room with a chain and I either lecture them or I go quiet, and Vera's had to fix both. I need somebody who has sat on the other side of that table for 20 years and knows exactly how the number gets made. You can't pay what I made. No. I can pay 110 and a share of what the company makes, and I can tell you that in 3 years, that's either meaningfully more or the company failed, and I'm not going to pretend I know which." Deanna turned her cup around. "What's the catch?" "The catch is that I will never ask you to sell something that isn't true," June said. "Not one time. Not the lead time. Not the warranty. Not where the wood is from. And I need you to understand that's not a moral position I'm asking you to admire. It's the entire product. The day we shade something is the day we're a cheaper Wickham & Cole with a nice story." Deanna Pyle put her hand flat on the table. "Then my condition," she said, "is that I see the real cost sheet before I quote anybody. Not the one you'd like me to have. The one that made you walk out of my conference room." Vera will have it printed before you get there. Hollis Bird came back in January. He drove out on a Saturday when he knew Roy would be in and stood in the parking lot for a while before he came inside, and he did not go to June's office. He went to Roy, which was the correct sequence and which June respected enormously. Roy brought him around at the end of it. "I said a thing to you in December that I meant," Hollis said. He was looking at a point about 8 inches to the left of her face. "I'd say it again. I just also like my job. I wrote you a reference in December. I know, I read it. That's about half of why I'm standing here." He shifted. "You wrote I was the best hand on a sander you'd ever watched, which is a hell of a thing to write about a man who'd just told you off in front of 50 people. It was true. Yeah, well." He put out his hand. "The plastics plant pays $2 more, and I have not been able to look at a single thing I made there." She built Theo's chair herself at night, over 11 weeks, out of the last of the quarter sawn from the January cut he had held for her when she was nobody. She did not let anyone else touch it. Danny caught her one Wednesday at 10:30 and had the good sense to leave without saying anything, and then bought a bag of the coffee she liked and left it on the bench, which was worse. She delivered it to the yard on a Saturday in March, in the plant's 1 ton, and carried it into the office with the wood stove in it and set it down on the concrete and stepped back. "You said you wanted to see it before anybody else," June said. "That was 14 months ago, and about 900 people have seen it before you, and I've felt bad about that for a year or so." Theo Nakamura walked around it once. He crouched and looked at the wedge in the leg, and ran his thumb along the 11 lamination seams the way everybody did, and stayed down there a while. "Whose oak is this?" "You know whose oak it is." "I'd like to hear you say it in my own office." "It's yours," June said. "Every board, including the $11,000 you didn't ask me for, which I paid you in July, and which you'd have let me pay you in September." He stood up. He was quiet for long enough that June started reading the invoices pinned to the wall. "You're going to have to say something eventually," he said. "About Tuesdays. 14 months of Tuesdays." Nobody had named it. It had been dinner, and then it had been dinner and the drive out to look at a lot of standing timber near Yanceyville, and then it had been the night after the page went up, when he had sat on her porch until 1 in the morning and said almost nothing, and had been the only person in the world she could stand. "I'm slow," June said. "I've noticed." "I've been told it's not a criticism." "It's a diagnosis," Theo laughed. The real one, the one that took his whole face in and said, "Sit in it with me and let's find out if it holds too." And that was more or less that. And it stayed quiet, and it stayed theirs, and neither of them ever gave anybody a better story than that one. The first full year closed on the 31st of October, $4,100,000 of revenue, 940 units of nothing hidden, 600 of them to 4 Wickham and Cole galleries, the rest to 19 independent dealers and 11 hospitality projects. The bedroom line, repriced twice, made money for the first time since 2011. Net margin of 6.5%, which is not a fortune and is not a story anybody puts in a headline, and which paid a profit share of $1,400 to every one of 68 people 2 weeks before Christmas, including Tam Bledsoe, who had been there 10 months and who cried in the parking lot and then denied it with a ferocity that reminded Roy of somebody. June took a salary for the first time in 14 months, $78,000. Vera set the number, wrote it on the sheet and refused to discuss it. The wait list ran to 16 months and then stopped being a wait list and started being, in the language of the trade, an allocation. Dealers applied. 2 design schools asked for the drawings, and June sent them, complete with the lamination schedule and the wedge geometry, and a note saying they were welcome to it. A competitor in Tennessee released a chair the following spring, with a dark oval on the outside of the leg that turned out, when a furniture blogger cut one apart on video, to be a decorative walnut plug glued into a shallow hole over a steel connector. Frances Okonjo-Reed wrote 3 sentences about that which June had framed and hung in the office, because Roy asked her to. They copied the mark and not the joint. That is the whole industry in one chair. Halloway is the most wanted furniture in America right now for the least romantic reason imaginable. It is the only one where the part you can see is telling the truth about the part you cannot. It did not get easier. That was the part June said out loud whenever anybody asked her to speak somewhere, which she did 4 times, and hated 3. 16 months of lead time meant 16 months of people being disappointed. Growing to 68 people meant she now spent most of her week doing work that had nothing to do with wood, and she was not naturally good at it, and there were 2 weeks in February when she was so tired she could not remember whether she had eaten, and Vera sent her home. She said no to more things than she said yes to, and some of them kept her up. Twice that year she looked at the allocation list and felt the old pull, the 4 minutes, the $10, the reasonable little door. And both times she went out and stood in front of the wall in the archive until it passed. The wall had 211 failures on it by then, screwed up board by board, dated and initialed and labelled in grease pencil, hers at the bottom right of the first column where she had put it in November of the worst year of her life. In the last week of that first year, she went into the archive with a hacksaw and a screwdriver and cut a 9-inch section out of the original steam-bent rear style of her father's chair, the real one, the one that had spent 10 years quietly pushing itself apart, and she screwed it to the wall in the empty space beside her own. She wrote the label the way he had taught her to: date, failure mode, initials, 2016, spring back in a compound bend, looked at the joint for 6 months. W.H. He was on his own wall at last, which is where teachers belong. And June stood there for a while with her hand flat on the oak and then went back to work because there were 11 chairs going out on Thursday. They changed the sign the following December, 2 years and a month after she had signed the transfer, on a Saturday in the cold. Roy ran the lift. Danny and Tam took the bolts out. Essie stood in the gravel with her arms folded and a thermos, giving instructions nobody needed. Vera counted the fasteners into a coffee can because she was Vera. Theo held one corner. Deanna Pyle came, and Bet Ferrara drove up from Charleston, and Elaine flew in from Portland and stood next to her sister in a coat that was much too thin for North Carolina in December, holding her elbow. The old panel came down, Halloway furniture, and beneath it, cleaner and newer and more permanent, a Kessler Industrial Company. The new one went up in white on dark green, painted by a signman in Sanford, who had worked from a photograph taken in 1991, right down to the slightly heavy serifs of a man who had drawn the letters himself on a Sunday because he could not afford a designer. Halloway and Daughters, and underneath it nothing at all, no parent company, no tagline, 68 people in a gravel lot, and a plural her father had painted onto a board 35 years earlier, when it was a promise he had no evidence for and made anyway. Somebody started clapping and it caught, and Roy took his hat off, and June Halloway stood in the cold with her sister's hand on her arm and looked up at her own name and let herself have it, the whole thing, all of it without the arithmetic, for about 11 seconds. Then she said, "All right, who's helping me load the truck?" Here is what June Halloway understood at the end of the hardest year of her life, standing in a gravel lot under her father's letters. Nobody handed her anything. A powerful man gave her a dying company because he was certain she would fail with it. And he was almost right, and the only reason he was wrong is that she spent 12 years learning things that nobody applauded: curved rails in a rented garage, honest estimates written slowly, the discipline of telling a customer the truth about a cabinet when a lie would have been easier and cheaper. None of that looked like a future while she was doing it. All of it was the future. She did not win by destroying the man who tried to bury her. She won by refusing to become him, by keeping the 4 minutes and the $10, by putting her own worst paragraph on her own website, by naming 4 employees on camera before she named herself. And when the moment came to take revenge, she chose daylight instead. Because daylight was the only thing that actually protected the 68 people who needed the building open on Thursday. If there is a lesson in this, it is not that dignity always wins. It is that the work you are quietly ashamed of, the small jobs, the years that felt like a detour, the skills nobody asked you for, is very often the exact thing that will finish what you thought you had lost. Keep your standards when they cost you money. Tell the truth when the silence would be more comfortable. Take the help that is offered and repay it before you are asked. And when you finally rise, take the people who carried you with you, by name, out loud. The part they can see should be telling the truth about the part they cannot. That goes for furniture, and it goes for the rest of it too. If June's story moved you, do 3 small things for us. Subscribe, so these stories keep finding you. Leave a comment and tell us the name of the person who taught you your trade, the one whose voice you still hear when you get it right. And share this with someone who is quietly doing good work that nobody has noticed yet. They may be closer to their moment than they think.